Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, next week there will be 2 federal cases in which the government is trying to make people accountable for elements of the BP oil spill. In both situations, the prosecution will be challenged to win its case. While the damage remains clear, the accountability remains unresolved. Also unresolved is life at the once promising federal city in Algiers. We'll examine the issues. We'll also look at new progress on Common Core, the mayor's plan for the Katrina 10th anniversary, and election year intrigue, characters, and speculation. Plus, while we are all used to scandal in American football, we have an Englishman to explain the bit of hot water that soccer is in. At the goal for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Richard Thompson, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. James Gill, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate. And Paul Purpura, reporter, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. We're going to head over to Errol first. And this week, the Mayor Landrieu, gave his State of the City, and we're looking forward to 10 years after Katrina. What did he have to say about observances?
Well, I think the best line by far in the speech, and he could have just given this one line and just gone home and left it right there, where he says that we're no longer recovering, we're no longer rebuilding, we're creating.
Right.
And that's the theme. He's used that theme before, but it's an important message, trying to move some of the emphasis off of the recovery, even though a good bit of the rest of his speech was about the recovery. And what's happening? And we're going to be hearing a lot about this between now and August, of course, as we face the 10th anniversary. And he announced an initiative called K10, where they're going to emphasize that things have been done, which are actually part of recovery. There's going to be various programs, and there's going to be a website all talking about those kinds of things. And it's not just a mayor talking. I mean, the fact is there is a lot of good news in terms of what's happened over the last 10 years. His frame of reference, of course, is the last 5 years since he's been mayor, and there has been some progress in that too. And he pointed to things like the agreement finally being made to develop the World Trade Center, the development of the St. Roch market, more people moving into town, the fact that sales tax collections have increased dramatically is all being good things. A couple of big problems financially are the consent decree for the sheriff's office, which is really just a burden, and also the fireman's pension fund argument. That's about like $26 million. And he even pointed out, and he said, if a judge says we've got to pay that $26 million, then they're going to have to tell us where to get the money from. But if they don't say we don't have to do that, look what we can do. We can fix potholes in streets, and we can rebuild the cities and rebuild the neighborhoods. And so that's really one of the major touchy points in his administration.
So as you said, he stated that we're no longer rebuilding. We're no longer, trying to recoup from the storm. We are now creating. Do you see it that way? We're at this creation point now?
Well, there's some rebuilding. If you count fixing streets as rebuilding, which I would, there is still a lot of that needs to be done. And I know everybody's aware of it. It's just a question of matching the funding with the time. But that's probably one of the more visible problems in the city as far as things that were caused by Katrina. But yeah, I guess we're creating in terms of the way the city is designed and the way the population is dispersed. And he was very, very sensitive about talking that the city be a multicultural city, and that there be housing opportunity for all people. And I think that's part of the recreating too, in terms of how we design the city in that way.
And that seems to be an issue that really a lot of people are increasingly concerned about, is housing and housing opportunities, where we're seeing our neighborhoods recover. Certain neighborhoods are really, for the most part, fully recovered. Other parts of town still need some recovery, but we're seeing rental prices going up. We're seeing housing prices going up, sale prices, which of course has the good side to it too. But that is something that is a concern, to try to keep longtime residents, maybe low income or middle income residents, in this city. Is it just growing out of their capability to live here?
It's a two-edged argument, and you can argue this thing back and forth, back and forth. On the one hand, when rents go up, that's bad, unless you own the property. That's good, and unless you're a retiree who's owned that property all your life, and it's very good. And there are some people that think, well, if all the poor leave the neighborhood and all the wealthy come in that's bad. But maybe some of the poor want a higher lifestyle too, and maybe some of them, especially as you have an emerging middle class, that they can become more part of that middle class, and so maybe it's good. And so if having a higher standard in neighborhoods means less crime, that's good. Okay. So, I mean, you can go back and forth in this argument all day long.
Well, certainly one thing that I think everybody really does want to have fixed is the pothole problem. I saw online that somebody had posted, a lost civilization found in one of Lakeview's potholes.
I think Lakeview is the ultimate example, because you drive around Lakeview and you see these houses that have been rebuilt, and I mean, they're huge houses. And actually, that was even going on before Katrina. There's been a history in Lakeview of building nice houses and somebody else coming along having another wave. But you see these wonderful houses, and you see Harrison Avenue, how financially rich it is. But the off streets, other than Oregon or something, are just terrible. I mean, they're like they're bombed out. And so I think if something epitomizes that kind of argument about rebuilding versus recreating, it's right along there.
Yeah, that's a big problem still to be faced. Well, 10th anniversary of Katrina in August, so we're just beginning now the series of things that the mayor sees that we will be doing, the city will be doing to remember Katrina.
There's going to be a lot of analysis of, it's like New Orleans had two histories. One started in 1718. And the other started in 2006. And so this is going to be the other history we're going to be revisiting.
Okay. Right now, let's visit over to Federal City. And Paul, and you've done some pieces about that. You've taken a look at it. Now, why don't you explain for those folks who maybe don't understand or don't know what Federal City is, what exactly we're talking about?
Federal City it's a concept that dates back. I mean, I first put the term Federal City in a news story back in 2003. It was part of an overall attempt to shore up the military installations in the New Orleans area, which was the Naval Air Station Joint Reserve Base in Belle Chase and the naval support activity in New Orleans. Everybody was aware that there would be base closure rounds coming, and so they thought that by consolidating the military operations that were scattered around the city at the military bases, you would make them enhance their wealth in a sense. So they started with the Naval Air Station Joint Reserve Base. They built, using federal money, they built a reserve center down there. They moved a Marine Corps battalion, that's headquarters that was on the lakefront, and some Army Reserve units down to Belle Chase. They were going to start with naval support activity, primarily in Algiers, right after that, but the 2005 base closure round came, and that was actually May 13th, 2005 is when the Navy announced it wanted to close the base. Mm-hmm. The saving piece, what saved the base in a sense, was the Federal City concept, because the Navy was in discussions with city economic development type people to move forward with a Federal City type project there, which is basically to build a small federal city, federal entities there. And the base closure round came, and there was an independent commission that overruled the Navy and said, since you were talking about Federal City, let's let the base go, let's let Federal City roll. And
so the naval support activity there in Algiers was shuttered, and so now it's got new life. There was some governance concerns with it for a while that maybe sort of hindered some of its development. Ultimately.
Yeah, there was the original group that was going to run Federal City was a nonprofit created in 2004 called the New Orleans Federal Alliance. Its members included Norma Grace, who was a vice chancellor at UNO, Bob Farnsworth, who helped build the World War II Museum, folks with experience in building things, development things. They were going to run this show. The Algiers Development District, which runs a tax increment financing district in Algiers, it gets a cut of the sales tax revenue from a Walmart and some satellite businesses over there in Algiers, they were all on board. There were a lot of people contributing. The Algiers Development District was providing seed money for consultants and things of that nature. Those two groups eventually had some sort of a friction between them, and therein lies a very public governance dispute. I think the business community was privately trying to push them to form what a public-private partnership. Get your act together, you two guys joined forces. And they did, and they created what's called the Federal City Joint Development Committee, which runs Federal City. However, the Algiers Development District, which owns it, has final say over what happens there. And
so let me bring you to now, what is happening there? There's a new developer, right?
Yes, there was the New Orleans Federal Alliance selected a developer. HRI Properties, which I think people are aware of here, was one of the partners in that partnership, and they left the project. I guess it was part of the fallout of the governance dispute. And the Algiers Development District, which calls the shots, has brought in a new development team, and they, in January, just signed, I think it's a 10-year contract to actually push things forward. So there is new life, there's new direction, but they're trying to figure out what that direction is going to be right now through a series of public meetings and coming up with a new master plan.
So there is a Marine Corps facility there.
Marine Corps Support Facility, right.
And is that like the headquarters for Marine Corps Reserve?
And Marine Forces North, which is the Marine Corps part of Homeland Security, essentially.
And there are also people that are living there still in that acreage, right?
Right.
And are these military folks who are living
Yes,
here?
the military families. The Navy had going and privatized its housing management years ago, and so they had like a 50-year contract to run the housing at Belle Chase and in Algiers. So they couldn't get out of the contract. So the Navy still owns housing there, but the acreage around it belongs to the ADD, and that the Algiers Development District, and that is being redeveloped. 118 acres is being redeveloped into the whole federal city.
And there's still some buildings there from the early 20th century. Some really, really beautiful.
1907. Yeah, great buildings, great architecture. They're vacant. A lot of them are boarded up since Katrina. In some cases, I think they're falling apart.
So never hear people talk about this issue. It's described as a standoff between factions. Is that correct? And if so, who are the factions?
I'm sorry.
He was asking about the standoff between factions, sort of
The
that governance issue.
dispute.
Right.
Well, it was the Algiers Development District, which again is created in state statute, and it comprises elected officials or their appointees. The mayor has appointee. Jeff Arnold, the state rep in Algiers, he's chairman and has been for a long time. His father, the former assessor over there, Tom Arnold, is a member. So the elected folks versus the nonprofit folks. Retired Marine Corps Major General David Mize was part of that crew, and
so is the hope to use those buildings for private use? Will there be private businesses moving in there, or maybe for residential, et cetera, all of the above, business?
There will be commercial type activities outside the Marine Corps installation. Okay. They want to redevelop further within the 29-acre Marine Corps facility as well, and they would bring in either other governmental entities or businesses that have security concerns that the Marine Corps has.
Right, and quickly also, we're doing an education project here, and one of our features is about the New Orleans Military and Maritime Academy, NOMA, and really they've done a beautiful job in renovating two beautiful structures, building a new one, a full component of high school. Now they have their first graduating class, so they're using that area too.
Yeah, they're one of the tenants. They were the first big tenant.
Right.
They were responsible for it becoming a historic district as well, National Historic District.
Okay, well, we'll be looking to see what's happening in Federal City in the future. All right, over to a man who's really hard to find an opinion coming from James, right? Well, we're going to get that from you right now. We're in a legislative session. We have a governor's race coming up in the fall. What you thinking, James, about what's going on?
Well, I think it's not generally appreciated what a hilarious session we're in right now. I think we're setting new standards in intellectual dishonesty, which is, I think, a bold claim. Well, the central problem, of course, is we have a budget hole of $1.6 billion at the same time as the governor is in thrall to Grover Norquist and America's tax reform, and is committed to his pledge, has signed a pledge to have no net tax increases. Now, this leaves the legislation in a position of having to produce more tax revenues to the tune of several $100 million without raising taxes. Now, you don't have to be an economist to understand this is clearly impossible. So what you resort to, of course, is a certain amount of semantic didgeridoo. Enact a tax increase and pretend it isn't. Or, now what happens, the thing is, if if you have a tax increase, you can do it only if it is offset by a tax decrease. So we have, for instance, they've done that with the plan to grant a tax credit, a tax decrease, a tax credit to reimburse parents and students for the higher education fee. You never heard of that, have you, the higher education fee? On account of it doesn't exist. But if it ever does, I mean, there's a plan to enact it. If it does, then the government will reimburse students and their parents the cost of it. That, of course, removes the entire point of the exercise, since the impact on the public's fisc is nil. But it does create the illusion of a tax decrease, which will provide an offset for an increase. At the same time, we have various tax credits and allowances have been repealed to the tune of more than $400 million. That doesn't count as, which of course means that businesses will be paying that much more in taxes. Now, when businesses pay an extra $400 million in taxes, they're inclined to believe that is as good as a tax increase. But the argument here is there is not really, because there is, for instance, the inventory tax, which companies pay to local government. State then reimburses the companies for those taxes. The proposal is that the state should reduce the reimbursement. It's too common, but to reduce reimbursement so that so the companies who had claims in excess of their other tax liabilities would no longer get a refund from the government. So there again, we have a total tax liability has increased, but because they're just merely reducing their refund, it counts. It regarded as meeting the definition required by Americans for tax reform. Meanwhile, that's not the only dishonesty here. What the House also passed $600 million in tax-free in repealing tax-free funds and rebates by a majority vote. The state constitution quite clearly says that you can't do that to do that you require a 2/3 vote. They went ahead and did it anyway, and when it was pointed out that what the state constitution says, the legislators produced a 1993 Attorney General opinion, which they said justified their actions. In fact, it didn't. This opinion applied to the suspension, that's a temporary suspension of taxes, not the repeal. So
let me jump in here and ask you then, are they solving the problem?
Well,
of a big deficit? And I've got to have you give me a brief answer on this one, because we've got to move along to the next one.
No, I'm not. We don't really know. I mean, the fact is that the constitutionality of those taxes has not been challenged in court, so that may not be challenged. Jindal has threatened to veto the budget if the tax pledge is not met. The legislature may call his bluff on that and try to override, but it's still all up in the air. I mean, the fact is that we are playing with imaginary numbers and invented definitions. So the answer to the question is, at the moment, who knows? They'll flub it somehow, I imagine. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to have to move on. But do you have a real quick question? Because we're over in this.
Well, an observation. I think this reminds me of the reverse of it. Early in the legislative session, when legislators reveal these great plans, this bill they're going to introduce for X million of dollars to do this for the district, right? And the district gets all excited. They get a lot of publicity. Of course, it never happens. And then as the session ends, they say, well, look, I was for it, but the rest of the legislature was opposed to it.
Okay. Always interesting in Louisiana legislature. Yeah. Always interesting when they're in session. All right, James, thanks. We're coming back to you to talk to us about soccer a little bit later. But first, over to Richard. BP. Okay, the BP just continues, and there's a trial coming up next week. What is that about?
So on Monday, the trial will be the second criminal trial, the second person who's been charged in connection with the oil spill. And his name is David Rainey. He was the VP of production for the Gulf of Mexico at the time of the spill. And so he's charged, he's one of 4 former BP workers, 5 overall who've been charged in connection with it. He faces 2 counts. One is obstruction of Congress, and also a second count of making false statements. And there's been a lot of questions about this already. In the 3 years since he was first charged, the obstruction of, to back up a little bit, the obstruction of Congress charge comes out from a briefing of a subcommittee that he gave in the weeks after the spill. They feel as though he lowballed the number of how much oil was escaping from the well at the time. He was a geologist by trade. He did his own calculations on it, and he presented a number that, at the time, it was what BP was putting forward, what they were kind of publicly releasing as it. But in hindsight, the Congressional Committee felt as though that was a little low. And there have been questions that his attorneys have raised since then about whether the subcommittee actually had the authority to be investigating this in the first place, as a regular committee would be. And so tied to that, the judge has already years ago dismissed this count, and then it was later reinstated by an appeals court. And so now he's going ahead on Monday facing these 2.
And then also in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, there's some other action going on.
And then in the Fifth Circuit on Tuesday, a panel is going to be hearing arguments from lawyers in the government regarding Kurt Mix, who was a former BP engineer. In late 2013, he was found guilty of a count of obstruction of justice, and the judge later overturned that and granted him a new trial, citing juror misconduct. And so both of these taken together, these are the first two criminal cases we've seen tied to the spill. Both seem to have questions that have been raised in regard to the larger issue of trying to hold people with connections to it criminally accountable. These were both, for the most part, largely rank-and-file guys, as were the other two, Donald Vidrine and Robert Kaluza, who were the two well site leaders. They were initially charged with 11 counts of seaman's manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, and a Clean Water Act fine. The involuntary, or the seaman's manslaughter charges were later thrown out. So already it seems as though they're going to stand trial next year on lesser charges. There's questions about this one that's coming up on Monday, and Kurt Mix has already been given a new trial after what happened with his.
So the two gentlemen who are facing the involuntary manslaughter charges still are facing charges, even though a set of those manslaughter charges had been dismissed.
They're still facing charges. They're accused of basically misreading a key test on the well that would have shown that it was in danger right before it blew out.
They were actually on the well at the time.
They were on the well.
Okay. All right, but some court proceedings coming up next week, so there'll be some news next week about that, we would guess. Okay, thanks a lot, Richard. Common Core. It seems like there has been an agreement reached in the
Well, there's some kind of
legislative
compromise,
session.
and what added steam to the compromise was the governor, the announcement that the governor would approve it, and apparently, even had he not approved it, it was going to pass anyway. But it's a weird kind of compromise, and it's very complex. There's three parts of it, and what it does is it creates a system for evaluating and coming up with the standards and the text questions, especially in math and English. It eliminates by law, some of the national review and the national questions, and it kind of creates this entire procedure. But I think what's interesting in it politically is that the process that it'll go through of having this committee review it and coming up, and the Board of Education could be involved with it, that won't be complete until 2016. And by that time, Bobby Jindal will no longer be in office. And so it's been pointed out that, in a sense, once Jindal signs this, he's really out of this in terms of Common Core, which means, though, that the next governor will have a lot to say about it. And I was thinking about this, that this means to me that Common Core has the potential of becoming a big issue in the gubernatorial race. I mean, I can see right now that in those debates and people campaigning, that the candidates for Common Core, whereas in the past it may have been an issue that they've easily threw to the side, I think this is going to be a major issue that the candidates are going to really have to hunker down on and be very, very specific. So in a sense, if I read this right, this is in a sense becoming a referendum on Common Core.
All right, so it's moved, legislation has moved out of the House, right?
Right,
and I think
right.
it needs to go to the Senate. Well, is the governor going to sign off on this?
Yeah, he said he would.
Okay.
And so it's on the way. But both sides seem to believe that they're going to get what they want. The anti-Common Core people said this is a first step towards killing it, and the Common Core people say this is a first step towards resolving it, and which is all the more reason why I think that the big step is going to be the gubernatorial election.
All right, and so this legislation does call for hearings statewide, according to the congressional
Right,
districts,
yeah.
to get public input into what the curriculum would be. Also, right, and then also be dealing with the standardized tests. Would not necessarily draw from.
And then come up with some kind of recommendation,
Yeah.
and that the governor's office cannot item veto in any parts of it.
Okay.
You could do a whole part, and so it really, where governor's office had powers, it curtails it, but this governor really, it'll be after he's
Yeah.
out of office.
The next governor to deal
Right.
with it. Okay, Errol, thanks. FIFA. What's going on with FIFA, and why is the United States dealing with this?
Well, the United States is the only country in the world that is not soccer mad.
That's true.
Well, that's what they say.
Getting there a little
Well,
bit more.
some way, but let's face it, most Americans think soccer's boring. Anyway,
It
anyway, up comes America and saves soccer from the corrupt organisation that runs it. And FIFA, the outfit that runs soccer nationwide, is a global criminal racket. Has been known as such for many, many years. Nobody did anything until this week. Up come the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York and indict several FIFA officials. That spurred the Swiss on to launch some investigations into the questionable procedure that led to the awarding of World Cups to Russia and Qatar. Qatar, let me tell you, is a tiny Persian Gulf state where it's too hot to play soccer, of course. World Cup is played in the summer, so they award this to Qatar, which has no soccer tradition, no stadiums, no nothing. Like plenty of this. Oil, you see. So that was awarded to Qatar, the 2022 tournament. And true to form, Qatar then imported all migrant workers to build the stadiums. They're dropping dead all over the place because it's that kind of enlightened place, is Qatar. So corruption of FIFA has some very, very severe consequences. But anyway, in fact, America has ridden in like the cavalry and saved the day for the rest of the world, which couldn't keep its soccer house in order.
So the bribery charges are involved here. That's basically what you're saying, right?
FIFA's run on bribery forever, yes. How could you award the World Cup to Qatar if there were no bribes?
Well, the head of FIFA has just been re-elected, has he not?
Today.
Yeah.
Yes, but by a reduced margin.
And Putin came out and strongly supported the head of FIFA. I mean, what kind of sports organization is this where Putin is taking a position?
Well, because part of the thing is that the 2018 World Cup is going to Russia.
Yeah.
And Putin's theory is that the Americans want to snatch that away from Russia and have it here, which wouldn't be a bad idea. But so that's the background there.
Okay, so the Swiss involved, the U.S. involved, any other nations involved in investigations?
Scandalously, no. I mean, no one's done it. And the Swiss wouldn't have been. Now, FIFA's based in Zurich, so of course. No, but I mean, the spirit of action has clearly been the indictments handed up this week in Brooklyn.
And then the arrest also in
James?
Well, that's what led to it.
Yeah. And we're going to have to now jump to looking ahead because we are just about out of time. The show's gone by quickly.
Okay, well, actually, it's just something kind of sad. I wanted to acknowledge that Ed Anderson, who was a longtime reporter, died this past week. He was on the. You didn't see him much around New Orleans because he was it's been a good part of his career on the Baton Rouge beat. This was the ultimate news guy. He lived for the news, and I knew him actually back from high school. And back then, so in the school newspaper, I mean, his life was news, and a no nonsense, really hard nosed news guy, and a real loss to the industry.
He was a true journalist. He's a real loss and just a great person. Richard?
I'm just waiting on these BP dates. That well was flowing. They knew something. I want to know what they knew.
Okay. What about Jim Brady? Has he been in touch with you?
Tom Brady.
Jim Brady. Tom Brady. Oh, Tom Brady. You are his fan.
He's
Nothing
very
new to say about
handsome.
Tom Brady? He also is going to be out 4 games, you know.
We'll see.
Okay, thanks.
Well, let's stick with the Limers. I mean, we just had an election. They just had an election in England. David Cameron was re-elected with an absolute majority to someone's general surprise. There's a move afoot in the Conservative Party for wrest England away from the European Union. David Cameron right now is trotting around the continent trying to get concessions under the European Treaty. We'll see what happens. Okay. But there is the Eurosceptics are afoot.
All righty. Quickly, Paul.
Federal City, you're going to see some buildings coming down, and you're going to see a new master plan put in place that spells out what the new vision is for the redevelopment of the old Navy base.
And we will be looking for it. Thank you. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you all for joining us. We want to see you next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.